Yeah.
If you guys need help.
Hang on a second.
Mm-hmm. And when will they be ready for showing?
They will be there for the December launch salon.
So if they place this forward, they get more accepted and launching.
So far.
So far.
So always a kind of hold your breath.
Mm-hmm.
Don't know.
Normal for your hair well that.
The production is funny beast. Computers and all these things that are involved. I sometimes hear a kind of echo from Cypress House, you know? Oh, we just didn't manage to get the image small enough for our computer screens. I would have blown up the computers. Uh-oh.
I don't want to hear that. No.
Right.
Oh, I should look at that.
Yeah, it had worked out, but like that moment, I mean, I remember I like went to the restroom and was like,
It's a
I'm looking at myself in the mirror going,
I think
you're gonna be a ball boy now, but you can do it over time, you know? And then,
And these are body.
they are wearing, you know,
Oh, absolutely.
Can I leave the camera with you?
Yes.
When I go to the blue.
Okay.
she lives here.
Right here. This is Annie. Please meet Mark. 20, I thought it was a 10. Okay, so I start over. So I have nothing but a 20 and there's no change. I'll come back.
okay. This is general information about
Oh, I'd like that very much.
Edgework,
Thank you.
and this is a sampler, which has excerpts from all the books that are going to be published in this round. But we're
Great.
asking for.
Great, yeah, I'll take one of mine. I'm here with Barry Business School. I'm going to write
Okay.
about this, so yes.
Great.
Yes.
So if you, all of the Edgework people have.
Stuff like that. They were using other than their
Yes.
Hi. General information at Edgework. Okay, you're all good. Hi. Come on. How are you?
Good, how are you?
Yeah, you too. Hi.
Gotta take advantage of it when you get it.
I know, I was wearing my down jacket 2 days ago.
Sorry, wait, but they. You too. No, no, it's fine.
You're not the only one.
Hi.
Right time, see?
Email newsletter.
Said she's done several things, and she doesn't want to repeat herself. However, well, I mean, she might not want to do it. But not if this is
Better information on Edgework. Yes, whatever.
Edith's eyes also sparkled when she was talking about it. She really does. So, I hope it was you think you know?
Well, I wasn't really hearing creativity first, and now I know very flowing here, spontaneous,
by Edgework. And some of you I know are familiar with the club, and some of you I think are here for the first time today, so always a special welcome to you. We do many things here at the club. We have a regular monthly concert series, and there is a brochure out there with all that information. I haven't put our own mailing list out today because the focus isn't really on the club as such, but I will do that so that we make sure we can contact you if you aren't already on our mailing list. We have a book group, which is different than this. We have a monthly talent night for those with and without official talent. And we welcome readers as well as musicians. So people who have a poem or a piece of something they'd like to read, and actually people come who do this for a living and work out things that they want to try, and people do it who would never think of doing it for a living and do it for fun, and then people come to see what turns up on that third Thursday. And that's always in the salon, which is the room you work out in with the fireplace. When I first came here 5 years ago, this building was traditionally a woman's club. And most of those were built in around 1920 when we got the vote, and that's to create together, and we think it has a really important role in shaping who we all are as a community, more today than ever. Some things are just for women, some things are focused on women, and everyone's welcome. So there's a variety of things, and depends on what they are and who the audience is. But when I came, I knew that there were things that I wanted to do, certainly the concert series and other kinds of community gatherings. But high on the list was more of a traditional salon for us to talk about things that were on our minds and focus attention, particularly on the writers in our community. And that's really why I named the room at the other end of the salon. It had been called the fireplace room, possibly for obvious reasons. And people have private events here, weddings and bar mitzvahs and all of that. That really is what supports the mission of the place. So when I show a prospective, whatever, party or that room, I say, this is the salon. Well, you might call it the bar, but we call it the salon. And I really named it that to set the intention that the right salon would come. I knew it wasn't for me to do yet one more thing kind of on just my willpower. And it's been waiting for 5 years. And last spring, Kim Chernin and Renate Stendhal, with Dorothy Abbott, who I think is here today, called and said, we have to have lunch with you, we have a great idea, and your club is calling for it. So we thought we should let you in on it. And that was too tricky not to do. And we met for lunch, we all agreed we had an hour. And about 4 hours later, we pulled ourselves, because the waitress was pushing us out the door, off that table because we were just so excited with the apparent timeliness of this and the whole concept of Edgework, which I won't discuss, but I know Kim will, was so exactly perfect a match for the club. So I knew that, all right, that's the salon the club has been waiting for. And many of you who are frequent supporters of the club have been saying, this is something we want, we need. We love what you're doing, but this is another part. And I just kept feeling like, just wait, it will manifest in the way that it should. Now I'll tell you also, as we discussed beginnings of everything, people don't quite know what you're doing, and they walk in and go, well, what's happening? So we would start in the salon itself, and then we thought in several months we'd probably be large enough that we would move down here for the reading part and use that for the gathering part. So obviously about 10 minutes ago we realized you all really have to jump on us. I guess it's something you've been wanting to. So anyway, I thank you for being here. This is a pretty fun and auspicious day, and we have a whole year of wonderful programming, but you're a very big part of that, I think, because we really want it to be as much discussion as sharing the work of these fabulous writers. So we'll come back often, but here we go for the day. Kim.
Good luck.
I really wanted to come and say welcome. We're very happy to be here. We hope you are. We also hope we're at the beginning of something that might be very interesting and pleasurable for all of us. A chance to meet monthly on the second Sunday of every month, and therefore get to know one another. We don't conceive of this, the way it's turning out today, like a reading. Reading, you respond, you go away, you buy a book, you don't. It's meant to be a community activity, to talk about writing and books and writers and women's publishing. It isn't even meant just to introduce Edgework Press. And to prove that, I'm not going to say anything about Edgework.
Oh, too.
You can read about us. We have the covers of our books in the first round out there. And we have a sampler with samples from all the books that are going to be in the first round. But I really would like to keep the feeling that we came together simply with our sponsorship, not to sell things and not to promote things, but to get to know one another and to talk. So in that sense, welcome. very happy to see so many of you, although I had the picture that we were going to be this small gathering of people who really would be talking one-on-one after our guests read. So we're looking for the way to evolve this. I don't think this is going to be our ultimate form. I could rather imagine concentric circles of us who are sitting on the floor, somehow that this is a participant event. So we're new, and we will evolve with us. And that's all I have to say. We have two guests today. Both of them are authors in the first round of Edgework books. Our books will officially be out in February, but our launch of them here at this club will be in December. And of course, we invite you all to attend. And all the writers will be here, and all our books as well. For now, we have two people, Suzanne Perry, who is the author of The Fortune Catcher. It's her first novel. She's working on the second one. And she will talk to you about both the novel and the circumstances of writing. It belongs to an Edgework series that we're calling Woman as Witness, or Women as Witness. And in that sense connects directly to Margaret Randall, poet, author, activist, and what I think of as the archetypal witness, somebody who has put her eyes on everything that most of us don't want to look at, know, or remember. And that's what that series is for. Margaret is not actually presenting today a book I'm hoping we will publish, which exactly typifies Woman as Witness. But since she is witness, it seems that the theme that is very well carried. And all I can say is welcome. It's lovely to see you all here. Suzanne, I'm here.
Well, I'm feeling a little scattered because since The Fortune Catcher came out in 1997, I've been speaking at events and doing readings at events, and I always have sort of a typical speech or talk that I give, introducing people to me and talking to them about the Iranian Revolution and how important it is or was, and how the reverberations of it are still with us. In talking in that sense, I usually meet an audience that is curious, interested, but of course thinks of Iran as being a faraway place and the Islamic Revolution as being something that could never happen here. Nor could it touch us really personally. But of course everything has changed since September 11th. And oddly enough, I feel a very familiar sense of trepidation about what's going to happen in the world. And so, as I said, I feel scattered. I'm not exactly sure how to present it all to you, but I think all of you in the audience are far more knowledgeable about what's going on in the Islamic world now than you were before September 11th. Maybe some of you were very aware of it, but the general public was not. When we were talking about the Salon, I said that I would talk about fanaticism, which is unfortunately one of my favorite subjects. And it is a central part of this novel that I wrote, The Fortune Catcher. But it is not the only thing in the novel that was important to me. I was 22 when the revolution in Iran happened, 23 when the Islamists came in and Khomeini took over. And I lived in Iran before that, and I experienced religious fanaticism but never feared it. My own grandfather was a mullah. My grandmother was a devout woman, Muslim, who never left the house, never listened to music, never drank alcohol, never saw a playing card, was disallowed from dancing. I accepted that. My life was quite different, even though I lived with them when I lived there. I never wore a veil, except for twice in my life. Once when I was 8 years old for dress-up, which was fun, and another time when I visited a holy shrine in the city of Mashhad, which was something I did at the request of my mother, who, by the way, is American, and was raised Jewish and Muslim. and converted to Islam sort of offhandedly when she married my father. We went to this shrine. I wore a chador, and I unfortunately don't look very Iranian, and unfortunate for me at that point in time, when we entered the shrine, where a wife of a saint is buried, the hostility from the other women wearing their chadors was intense. Never forget it. I felt not only invisible wearing that veil, humiliated, hot, but also singled out. They knew that I was not one of them, and I was angry with them. They shoved me, they pushed me, they told me to cover my hair even though my hair was covered. There was an intense anger for me. I never was afraid. I was angry back. And it wasn't until maybe 10 years later, after the revolution, that I realized I should have been afraid. And I should have thought about it more. And I should have tried to understand it more. Then after the revolution, I decided to write The Fortune Catcher, which was my journey to understanding what happened, and my journey to understanding fanaticism, which is extremely complex. It is not a simple indoctrination of children, keeping them isolated. It is extremely complex. It is, happens to educated people, non-educated people, and as such. So, while The Fortune Catcher is a love story, it's also a story about war, the Iran-Iraq War, a story about Israel, a story about the arms race, as it had to do with Iran at the time, a story about American foreign policy. It is a historical novel, but in it is my favorite character, and that is a woman, older, who is an Islamic fundamentalist. I'm going to read the first chapter that I write in her voice. The entire novel is not written in this voice, but portions of it are. Just so that I can open a discussion, because I think this chapter does do that. So we can talk about, as Kim said, instead of me just talking to you, or you all talking to me too. Her name is Mama Gazor, which means big mother or grandmother. There is a story about my life that I have not told anyone. When I was a young woman in the years between the great world wars, I went one day with my mother to the hammam. This was before everyone thought to build baths in their own homes. Pity. The hammam was a wonderful place. I can still smell the sandalwood oil and feel the warm steam settling on my skin. This takes place in 1979, by the way, this speech. I learned many things in the hammam by listening to the women talk. Even as a little girl, I listened. The other children played splashing and hiding games, or they pestered the washing women, who finally opened their lobes to frighten them with the sight of their dense black pubic hair, telling them this was a hungry monster. But I listened to the khanoms, the ladies. I learned how husbands can be cruel but tamed, how servants must be disciplined and never trusted, how to handle the complexities of matchmaking. I knew that when I grew to be tall and married, I could be a great khanum, a great lady, because this was what I was in my day, in my heart. It was my mother who taught me to value myself this way, who told me that Allah had given me a wise soul, had written an important destiny on my forehead. And it was she who held me up during the hardships of my marriage and my early widowhood. I loved my mother more than anything on that day in the hammam when she braided my hair and whispered small kisses along the top of my head. Though I was 25 years old, a khanum by then for certain, in my sweet mother's presence I was content to feel like a pampered child. After our baths, we walked out onto the sidewalk to our waiting carriage. I remember the gray sky, the color of an iron rice pot, and the crisp breeze fluttering our chadors. My skin was still warm from the water and my nostrils full with eucalyptus steam. My mother's cheeks glowed pink as young pomegranates, and her eyes smiled at me with the warmth of a bread oven. It was a moment so peaceful I could have framed the rest of my life in it, lacquered it in my mind like a miniature painting so as to find comfort in it whenever I was troubled. But the moment remains in my thoughts as a pin in a cushion, always puncturing, always painful. It was one of Reza Shah's equestrian police who bounded his horse onto the sidewalk and reached down to yank my mother's chador from around her. She screamed and put her hands to her bare head. The soldier threw the fabric into the narrow jute and watched the rushing dirty water take it away. My mother clutched at her body, crossing her arms over her breasts as if she were naked. Not since her 9th birthday had she been without her chador in front of men outside our family. Now her flowered shift fluttered in the wind. Her cheeks were pale and wet with tears of shame. The Passaban spoke to her, but I knew from her empty stare that she had taken herself somewhere else. He reminded her that the chador had been abolished by order of Reza Shah, the new and modern king. He reached for me, then held back. I believe it was the hatred in my eyes that gave him pause, for I have used that look many times since then, and I have never lost a battle with it. I vowed on that day that I would not let anyone force anything upon me. I drew my mother quickly into our carriage and ordered the driver to go. I draped my chador over her and she sobbed into the cloth. Once at home, she pounded her chest, pulled at her braids, cried all the terrible sin of her exposure. My heart burned for her. I held her and tried to comfort her. She seemed so beautiful as the candlelight bounced upon her hennaed hair. She had me promise I would not tell anyone of her shameful experience. I promised. Finally, she fell asleep, but only after I heard her vow to God that she would never leave the house again. She became very devout and very quiet. She said her prayers slowly, stretching out the Arabic words until they sounded like lyrics to a song. She purified herself more often out on her balcony, pouring a slender stream of water from a porcelain pitcher onto her head and shoulders. I begged her not to wash so often, but her communication with me was no longer in words, but in kisses and caresses. Helpless, I watched the hairs on her arms and neck stand straight up like goose flesh in a flurry of snowflakes. Even my father noticed my mother's excessive behavior. He scolded her mildly, but how harsh can you be with a woman who honors God? The doctor said it was the pneumonia that killed her, but I will always think of Reza Shah as her murderer, and my mother's death as another casualty in his march away from the laws of Islam. And the British, they were responsible for my mother's death. It was their ideas that they sprinkled like seeds into our new king's mind, ideas that would grow into monstrous trees under which the whole country was made to sit and live. He wanted to be like them, was taken in by their pomposity, wanted Iran to mirror the West. Stupid man. And then the others came, the French, the Germans, the Russians, and finally the Americans, occupying us, telling us how to live, telling us that our rituals were backward, that the separation of girls and boys in school was wrong, that men should wear strips of cloth down the front of their shirts, that a woman's beauty belonged to everyone, her legs exposed, even her shoulders, so men could stare at her, violate her. Ah, the West. Not only did they steal our oil, they stole our traditions. And now, thanks to Allah and to the blessed Khomeini, they are gone. Thank you for listening. I tried at the time to expose what was going on in Iran. Before the revolution, women did not have to wear veils. Although there were still restrictions, you couldn't leave the country without the permission of your husband, that sort of thing. But there were women in politics, and there still are in Iran. In fact, there are many women in politics. Of all the Islamic nations that we know as restricted, Iran actually has the fewest restrictions as far as, if you look from the outside in, as far as politics is concerned, and things are getting better. However, you still will be flogged 80 lashes if your hair shows and the morality police come to get you. You are still stoned for adultery, and in fact in the book I have, in the very beginning of the book, a scene of a stoning for adultery of 2 women. So a good portion of the book where the protagonist is in Iran addresses women's issues, and then, of course, issues of identity later on when she returns to the United States. Yes.
My understanding is that since that time, that the centrists have more come to power in Iran, to some extent anyway. And I wonder two things. One, how typical in the Khomeini time was your character? Is she, because she grew up doing this. I'm curious how typical that was, and about women now. What is the situation of women now, and how do they feel about it? And again, under the present time, how many women feel the way she did?
Of course, this novel takes place in 81 and 82, which is really directly in the aftermath of the revolution, when a great many executions were still going on, roadblocks were everywhere, the hostages had just been released, so there was still, and the war was going on, which was a great excuse for the
Theocracy.
Yes, theocracy, the state of power. Thank you. But the way women were treated then and the way they're treated now has its cycles. The women, Iranian women, have a very strong tendency to be very out there. And there was a very strong women's movement, and still is a very strong women's movement. However, most of what goes on behind closed doors. So women in Iran, the middle and upper class, will enjoy a Western lifestyle behind closed doors, as they did in ancient times in the harems. But when they go out in public, they must wear the veil, and they feel oppressed by it. There's a great deal of oppression of women, and women are still upset about it. The theocracy, although there are moderates, they're still theocratic moderates, and they don't have that much power, unfortunately. The people who do have the power are the fundamentalists. They're the ones with the guns. They're the ones who are supporting terrorism. I would say 90% to 95% of Iranians right now wish they would be gone, but they don't have the power nor the stamina to fight against them.
It feels like you were describing what I think of today from what I've read in the Western press as a Taliban woman, if there is such a thing, or an Afghan woman. Is that accurate? Is that feeling of fanaticism what we see with people, or at least men cheering in the streets?
It's exactly that. The Talibanism has, of course, been condemned by the Iranian government as a far too restrictive case of Islam, which is, of course, laughable. Although, in many ways, that's true. Women do not have to wear the burqa in Iran the way Taliban women do. Women are allowed to go to school, and in fact, since the revolution, there's now an 80% literacy rate in Iran, and there was only 20% literacy rate at the time of the revolution. They work, although, of course, their life is in a court of law worth half that of a man's, and so is their testimony. So there is a huge double standard, but I would not compare Afghani women with Iranian women. Afghani women are far more persecuted, and their lives are just unbelievably worse.
They wouldn't have enjoyed having a chador like their grandmother and this person did?
It's not, I think, there are some, it's such an interest, the whole issue of the chador is, for me anyway, one of the most important issues. I've spoken to audiences where women are wearing chadors, and they're very angry with me for being against it, and they say this is a case of identity, and this is a case of protest against Westernism and modernism. And one of the reasons Iran became, it wasn't supposed to become an Islamic state. We were just supposed to, we were all excited at the revolution. We were just overthrowing the Shah, and hopefully we're going to be a republic like Turkey. But women put on the chador in protest. And some women feel comfortable with it because that's the way they've always lived. If I were to ask you to take your shirt off, you'd feel uncomfortable. So to me, it's not a matter of why I wrote this portion where she's speaking about this sort of unfair thing that happened to her. It's not a matter of wearing the chador or not wearing it. It's a matter of choice. And there is no choice, you see. Personally, if you ask me, what do I think of the chador? I think a tool of subjugation. But I'm not going to begrudge somebody wear it.
Is the oppression of women part of the Muslim religion? Where do women fit in the Muslim religion?
Well, I'm not an expert, okay? What I can say is that, yes, it is. In my opinion, it is. No matter what people say about how it's a peaceful religion and a religion whereby, everybody's treated equally, that's, to me, religion, I became very unreligious, obviously, after the Islamic Revolution. And my feeling about it is, look, there's religion, there's doctrine. What you take from it is your personal, whatever makes you feel good. And, but if you read it word for word, you'll see it was written, thousands of years ago. So was the Bible. So, yes, is it misogynistic? Yes. And the culture is, even more so.
Yes.
When was the last time you were in Iran? What was your experience and what's your relationship with your father?
The last time I was in Iran was 1978, in August, which was right before the outbreaks. In fact, there were some demonstrations even before then. I led a very sheltered life there. I went there for visits mostly by that time. I was planning on going back in the spring to spend a year or two there. I had hoped that I might spend many years there. I finally finished my studies here. My parents live in New York. My father is, I'm very close to my father. My father was religious, he is still, in his own way, religious and Islamic. But my father married a Jewish woman, a Jewish and Christian, and hid it from his own parents, and that was in 1956. So, interestingly enough, he was never a fundamentalist, and saw that for what it is. We have very many of the same views, so my relationship with him is very good. Did I answer your question? Yes. Kim, tell me how long I have, because I don't want to go over.
We'll make it up as we go.
Somebody way back there.
I've heard frequently that the veil is not required to be written in the Quran.
That's true.
Can you tell
In
how
fact,
the veil came into the Islamic worlds?
Well, it's interesting because the nomads, where Islam began in the desert in Arabia, and the tribes, the women don't wear veils. I mean, they do now, but they didn't. And now in Iran, in fact, they don't. It's not part of their costume. There is a reference, several references in the Quran to the word hijab, which is what we use to describe the wearing of the veil in modern times. Hijab in Arabic means curtain. And there's a woman named Fatima Mernissi, who is a Moroccan sociologist and writer who's written extensively about the veil and about Islam and the interpretation of Islam as it relates to women. And she clearly analyzes this in a book called Islam and the Male Elite. You're talking about a patriarchic society, and they'll do anything to make sure that women are subjugated, and that women are responsible for the men's sexual aberrations or sexual feelings. So they interpreted this surah in the Quran where Muhammad says, you must visit me, to a friend of his, you must visit me in my home where my wife will be, and you can visit us, but we will be behind a curtain, a hijab. Okay? Talking about the privacy of husbands and wives. That's an example of how that has been, who knows how, translated to mean that women must veil themselves. And it's a very urban, actually, thing. I can't think of the word for it. It happened more in urban areas where women were forced to wear the veil. It's really simply a patriarchal leftover, and has nothing to do with the Quran.
Yes.
How much spousal abuse is there?
Oh, I would imagine the same amount that there is here. The difference being that it's allowed. it's allowed.
You
Yes.
said earlier that fanaticism was a complicated state of mind, and so I don't expect that you should explain it all to us here, but I'm curious to hear what the elements of it are.
Yeah, I've been thinking about that a lot lately, and I think Americans should think about it a lot. Fundamentalism is in this country in the same shape and form as it is in Islamic countries. I have a neighbor who is one of my dearest, dearest friends. I absolutely love her to death. Sweet, kind, wonderful. We babysit each other's kids, etc. She grew up in Illinois. She thinks I'm going to go to hell. And I asked her about this. She was telling me about the rapture. We were talking about it because of all these books by Tim LaHale and whoever that other guy is that have become very prevalent and bestsellers in this country about how if you take Jesus Christ, believe he is your Savior and accept him as that, you'll go to heaven and everybody else will not. And I said to her, I said, well, what's going to happen at the rapture? I said, I guess I'm going to go to hell. And she said, I know, I feel so bad about that. So, yeah, it's time. So, that's sort of the way I could go on forever.
There are lots of questions, obviously,
I think-
still. But I think it's 4 o'clock. We have something like another hour for the program in quotation marks. So I think if we invite Margaret to read now and discuss her book and then make a link so that all the questions we still have can still be linked with the common topic. Oh, right.
Thank you so much.
A salon like this happens because there's a need. I feel that Suzanne has happened because we all need her. We so badly need that voice, and I really look forward to reading your book, Suzanne, and thank you so much for that really illuminating reading and discussion, in the sense that these are things that so many of us have ignored for so long. They belong to so much of the world, and it's almost terrifying that September 11th has had to happen to make us understand that we belong to one another and need to understand these phenomena, which I very much agree we share in this country, in our own fanaticism and our own fundamentalism, and hopefully our own response as well. I just want to thank all the Edgework women for this idea, Kim and Renate and Dorothy and Annie, and I know I'm leaving a lot of you out, and just express my thanks for your allowing me to be part of it. I have 2 books coming out, one in this first round, which is really 2 books in itself. It's where They Left You for Dead, first series of poems, and Halfway Home is the second series. And another book coming out in next year's round called Into Another Time, which is yet another series of poems. In this first round, poems in one cover. Where They Left You for Dead is a series of poems written to my partner, and very much out of the experience of living with and loving someone who suffers from chronic pain. What that does in a relationship, how one learns to build upon that, to walk through it, to walk with it. The second series of poems in this first book, Halfway Home, is about aging. So while these 2 subjects are not perhaps as urgent as the subject that Suzanne addresses and her work addresses in this novel, I think that they're also subjects that are with all of us, or with many of us. Certainly the aging is with many of us. And Into Another Time is a series of poems coming out of the experience of Grand Canyon, which is one of my special places. The river that flows through it, the walls that have built it, the secret places, and what it means as reality and as metaphor in my life. I'm going to share a few poems first from the book that will be out in December. A few from this first part of the book, Where They Left You for Dead, and a few from the second part, and then I'll read a couple from next year's book. The poems in Where They Left You for Dead all begin with an epigram from something that has mentored me. Very often, but not always, is a woman's voice. Sometimes it's a male voice. Very often it's a poetic voice. Because I've felt in this journey through chronic pain the need to listen to my mentors. And many of these poems then, or all of these poems in this first series, are in response to those words. This is number 2, and it starts off with a short quote by David Orr. The way in which indigenous peoples certified adulthood was rooted in place. A child became an adult in a place. But we don't do that. Education ought to allow for bonding to the natural world. There is a river charged or gently flowing through Grand Canyon, even when we are not there to view the scene where rock and water meet. There is a river balanced by your ape. It's equal in every way but one. Foolish expectations. The music tells us sheep may safely graze. I too seek that safety, animal and human, vegetable or sudden raging wave. Now you are deer dancer, dual walking sticks to steady unfaithful legs. Up and across millennia of rock, this canyon's bighorn sheep gain narrow ledges, graze without concern for safety, sometimes fall. A tumble of whitened bone reveals its story of harsh terrain. Days follow water and sun, nights offer their display of stars, translucent walls mass ochre, red, pale gold, slashed through by unforgiving shadow. Then comfort spreads her arms. You place one foot before the other. This one begins with Audre Lorde's words, I could slip anchor and wander to the edge of the jetty, uncoil into the waters, a vessel of light. Is my voice not making it that thing? You say you are leaving yourself behind, a sort of death. You watch my face, but not in this dimension. A different recipe for dying. Pay attention now. Watch your back. Both sides and everyone between. Early family requirements. Forced to choose between this unnamed illness and the labyrinth out. You must relax your gaze. I cannot get close enough, cannot climb inside your pummeled skin, though I would barter my years. Helpless, I follow your desperate gait, the streaks of pain you trail. Climbing a debris field of shifting boulders, you despair defy, break running toward your infant self, where they left you for dead. Now you pick up life and carry it. Life pokes at this illness without name, crowds you, presses for signature, forces a retake. You say you are leaving yourself behind. I stand beside you, waving. This begins with another couple of lines from Audre Lorde, telling myself stories of someone I used to be. You speak and I listen. Words or silence, gesture or ribbon of sound issuing from the punished cell, a door shutting on memory that reemerges now to lift the cord vibrating beneath this other, older pain. As your body speaks, I attend to signs. Feel for that hard knotting of tissue where horror gathered its power to cripple and break. Those who ask for proof have never tried to decipher a body decoding. Those who ask for proof have already taken sides. In innocence or guilt, they are complicit with the damage done. She who loves this spirit fighting to survive knows she must lick raw wounds. We invite the crime and criminal into our bedroom, onto our bed. The flat of my palm fires up each lump of fear, shares risk, dissolves, an exercise in redemption, circling back, smoke signal clear. And this is Ursula Le Guin. Men once initiated never got the second chance. Their loss, not ours. Why borrow poverty? Montana, the monkey-faced spider, spins her web in the pale light of our front porch. From the highest beam, she descends along its orbed strands, her larger shadow moving on the opposite wall, her work a summer ritual that will end in the dying season, only to return with spring. Then she will be another spider, but we will still call her Montana. Watch her with the same intensity. Blessed she has chosen our entranceway for her brief stay. Translucent body, resilient and strong as steel. In this house we are moving, have moved, will move through that ancient rite, women becoming crones, intoning the stories of our lives, open to doors, eager to learn the lessons however they are forged, in pain and change. Even this unnamed illness, invisible to the experts, a woman in movement, reflects Montana's natural style, birth of her home, death of a season, return of her energies in a body new and ready once more to enter its work of life. I think I'll read a couple from the second series. If they talk about age, this is from Halfway Home. If they talk about age at all, people mention brittle bones, stooped shoulders, diminishing height, loose skin, thickened waist, a film that creeps across the eyes, and loss of mind. Speaking above or below us, talking about, sometimes forcing themselves to look us in the eye. If they speak of age, it is with disdain or sorrow, pity dripping from the casual sentence, embracing us sideways, urging us to sit when we wish to stand, or keeping us on our tired feet past the witching hour,
Adult diapers, denture cement so tough they will hold a ceramic cup to the palm of a hand, but may fail our teeth when the TV screen goes blank. 1,000 supplements, pills, gadgets, and remedies to girdle our excess presence, make us young again. I want to tell them about the wonder of hummingbirds and moons, new shadows upon a landscape of knowledge gained, cliffs, mysterious as forever, words lost, but images gained, sun warmer than it's ever been upon my hands. It's too late. Their beloved names aren't there, yet the mother continues to tempt them with rice pudding, shelter their bodies from the night, cradle them against her hopeful breast. Ottilia, condemned to live these years her children could not have. Even Patricia has lost count. The sister and brothers torn from her childhood murmur in her ear. The missing will only come back with us when we set a table, served with the food of change. The sentence slows, marks time, directs its energy to the recuperation of a single word. I see its silhouette, pale, space like an empty cookie cutter, unfilled. Other words swim in this anxious light, similar, dissimilar, imposters, or, if I could only breathe, perhaps cues to the puzzle that assaults my fury. The words that do come are dancing shadows, taunting the place where memory should be. A scene from 40 years before emerges in raucous detail, but this poor word, no doubt cackling behind my back, would rather keep me waiting a bit longer or forever than slip into place, easy as the unstudied gesture. At a certain point, I decide to flip the switch, erase the stalled attempt, move on. Sometimes my lost word chooses that moment to show its mocking face. Sometimes, but not always. I wanted to share a couple of 3 or 4 more short ones. These are from the other book, Into Another Time. And this first one is called Time Changes. This week, reduced to the rapidity of surprise, ends almost before it begins. I do not speak of measurable time. Yes, I know Monday defeats Sunday. Tuesday rounds the inevitable turn in the road, and Wednesday crests the mountain ridge as we fall backwards towards week's end. Action slows, then speeds like a small wooden boat as it slips off the tongue of water into the Chernin rapid. I am talking about time, moving too fast for comfort, all together now, and salty, not sweet. Or perhaps it is the other way around, each gesture so mindfully sweet that I stand here, turning it in my hands, relieved, astonished. This one is my every molecule. Pipe organs of tubular basalt reach high above me. I lean into their silent notes. A cross-bedded, cross-stitched, swirling layer of sandstone coils beneath my hands. Small stones, perfect beads in a necklace, circle the butte across from where I stand. Rock juxtaposed like the weaver's warp, overhangs, hollows, and knobs, polished to a hungry glow by sand and water and time. All this embraces me, invites me to dance on this sliver of beach, holding my every molecule in place. And this is Edge. Hermit shale nudges Coconino sandstone, one edge against the other. A place where every sound retracts, all light condenses, living on the edge. In our lexicon, these words speak risk, adventure, a going beyond the expected or safe. While here on earth, edge is the meeting place, precise moment between one and the other. You face your wholeness, I mine. The edge between us is stunning and complex, product of our geology's desire. I think I'll leave it there with our geologist's desire. And it may be more difficult for some of you to feel like talking about poetry, but if you would like to, I'm here, and I would love that. So if there are any questions or comments or anything at all, I'd be happy, and if not.
Did you write your Grand Canyon pieces while you were there?
I wrote them, we are fortunate because we live in Albuquerque, New Mexico. We live 7 hours from Grand Canyon, and we've probably been there. Well, I individually, since the time I was a child, have probably been there 150 times. And my partner and I go frequently. We've actually done the river trip 3 times, but we go, next month we're going again to celebrate our 50th anniversary. So, we drive over every once in a while, and these poems, the canyon and river poems were written mostly this past summer after coming off of our 3rd river trip, and very sure that it was going to be our last, that we were no longer physically able to do that kind of a trip, and just being very grateful for having had the opportunity to do it a number of times. So, they weren't written actually in the river trip. I do have a poem in this book, which is, I have some humorous poems, believe it or not, although not many. I wish I had more. And there is one poem in which I talk about this pristine notebook that I take on all of my trips, and certainly on all the trips I've made on the river, hoping, expecting to write something at night, actually in the place, and coming home from this last trip with every page in this notebook bound, but the experience very much inside.
Do you write even when you can't think of anything to write, or just when you're inspired? You write every day, or, well, obviously not on a trip, but...
It's interesting. I think that I used to be a person, and I hope to be getting back to be that kind of a poet who writes almost all the time. Not always necessarily poetry, but who writes every day. I write long hours. I revise excessively. I go back again and again. And about 3 years ago, I hit a period in which I couldn't write at all. And I thought, oh, well, you know, I've had these periods before, but then it went on and on and on. And it became, as I say, 3 years. And it was Edgework books that brought me out of that period. It was Chernin in this case, but I think it was also just the idea of what Edgework is doing. And for this reason, what Edgework proposes is personally so exciting and valuable to me. I think we need community. We need conversation. We need dialogue in a way that many of us get in writing groups, many of us get when we're professors from our students, or get in different ways. But I think many of us find it hard to have that communication that frees creativity. And Edgework has really given that to me. And so for me, the first book was written before these 3 years. And the second part of the first book and the entire second book are products of this kind of communication. So, I think that there are moments in our lives. In my life, it was sort of that transition from being a person who worked out, I was a professor and I worked here and there and did different things, to being what they call retired. That was something that became very, very painful and difficult for me. I didn't know how to handle it. I never suspected that I wouldn't know how to handle it. And I think in different people's lives, it may be different things. It may be the end of a relationship. It may be some painful experience. It may be a big life change of some other kind. Or it may just happen, and you have to figure out why. It seems there is no obvious reason, but nevertheless it happens. So I think that those are the times when we really come back to ourselves, to our bare bone selves, and that's when this need for something like Edgework really becomes apparent. I have published 80 books in my life, and I know that from none of the so-called big New York publishers does one get this kind of give and take. And this is what Edgework represents to me. So that may be a long-winded response to your question, but it gave me an opportunity to say that. So thank you. Yes.
What types of political activism are you involved in lately?
Well, I think, I've been involved in the last years very much with prisoners' rights, very much with an organization that deals with the situation of children of political prisoners in this country. I do lesbian and gay activism. I've done a lot of Central American activism, although less in the last few years because there's very little to do. I'm involved with choice, that kind of activism. But I think that, as Suzanne said, everything has changed now, and I'm rethinking, because I think a lot of people are, where to put my energies. I think it's extremely important right now. Maya Angelou said, this is a time for thinkers to think. And I don't see very many thinkers thinking, so I think those of us who think should start doing that, or continue. Somebody over here had their hand up, but she had a lead. Sorry. Okay.
Are you still taking pictures?
Yes, I'm still making pictures, and that's a big part of my life. And, I love doing that, so I'm fortunate in that way too. I think that.
Tell me about your youth. What prompts you to start writing about something?
I think my muse is necessity. I sort of, I do it when I have to do it, and I almost always have to do it. That's sort of the first draft muse. The second and third and 8th and 50th draft muse is just a lot of hard work.
When first draft music, is the drive from inside of you or from outside?
Could be either. I think it's probably more from my inner response to things outside of me.
I'm just curious about the 3 years where you didn't write. What was it like just daily? Did you have a thought like, maybe I should, I just don't feel like it, or what was the experience like?
It was awful. It was really pretty horrible. I'm fortunate to have a partner who said, you know, you don't have to do anything but write. You've worked hard all your life, and you know, and you don't have to feel that you have to write. You can read books or climb mountains or whatever. And it was very, very painful. You know, I shouldn't say that I didn't write at all. I wrote book reviews, and I continued to do public speaking, and so I would write keynote speeches, and you know, I wrote a lot of that kind of thing. But what really excites you, what really moves you, just wasn't there. And I felt dead most of the time, and I would say to myself, well, I guess I'm not a poet anymore. You know, I used to be one. That was nice.
Did you feel guilty?
No, not really guilty. Just dead. Just dead.
When did this process begin, this writing poetry?
Oh, when I was about 6 years old, about 60 years ago.
So Margaret, the fact that you have written 80 books and that you started writing at the age of 6 doesn't seem to have made any difference when you stopped writing for 2 years in terms of the identity you had as a poet, it just vanished.
Well, at first, I mean, it wasn't from one day to the next. At first, I certainly felt that I was a poet, and I continued to do a lot of readings, and I thought, well, I'm just having a short dry spell. But as it extended itself, I had to wonder. I mean, poets write poems, and so if you're not writing them, you have to ask yourself the question, well, you know, maybe I was a poet, and now I'm supposed to be something else. Maybe I was supposed to be, I don't know. I mean, I've had desires to be other things in my life, and I've been other things. I've been a midwife. I've had other identities in my life. When I came back to this country after 23 years in Latin America, what I most wanted to be was an air flight controller. And I actually went down to school in Albuquerque and was told that I was too old. I was already 48, and you know, the cutoff was 45. So, you know, it's not. And I have children and grandchildren, so you know, I'm many things, but to myself and to others. But I just thought that that would not be part of my life anymore.
I was just thinking about something that does tie your and Suzanne's work together. As I was listening to your poems on aging, I was thinking about a feeling that I had. I just had a baby about 4 months ago. And that initial postpartum period where I felt like, and certainly the world is the least sexual of beings, and we just had a baby. And I felt like that. But I had to go out and do stuff. And I had a thought one day as I was thinking about nursing the baby and then getting the it would be so easy to just throw on a burqa and walk to the grocery store. And then I wouldn't have to undress. And I wouldn't have to like think about how anybody else looked at me, what I looked like to anybody else. It was just it would be so relaxing. And that and this was before September 11th. But I just thought of that feeling when I was listening to your poems and thinking back about the woman in the chador. Suddenly I had this sense of maybe why it would be liberating.
Well, I suppose it really comes down to being about what Suzanne said, which is choice. You know, it's one thing to be forced to dress in a certain way or act in a certain way,
And it's quite another to be able to choose them, because what's right for each one of us is not necessarily right for anybody and any of the others of us. So it's about choice, I suppose. So shall we salon? Yes. Thank you. Before we go to salon, I wonder whether the other writers in round one would like to come up and present themselves to you. Toby, are you still or Margot? Dorothy Abbott was one of our very early advisors to Edgework and has continued in the capacity of an editor. I'd love you to come and tell just a bit about the book you're editing. Renate and Suzanne. Here we are. There's one of us missing. Here we are. My daughter's going to hate me for doing this because I'm going to tell it wrong. There was a Monty Python skit in which the contestants were required to summarize the plots of great works of literature. For instance, in remembrance of things past, and they had a very short amount of time, like 10 seconds or 15. We're going to perform this now. No one knew about this, but that's what we're going to do. Starting with Margot. Tell us about the book.
It's called Seduction, a Portrait of a Nice Man. And it's a...
Use the mic.
Better? Better. Hello. Okay. My book is called Seduction, a Portrait of Anais Nin. And it is, I guess it's classified as a psychobiography. I think she was emphasizing psycho here. It's actually a personal reminiscence. I was very close with her the last 10 years of her life. I'm also a clinical psychologist, and the book sort of came into, this is taking longer than 2 seconds. Anyway, that's what it's about. How I resolved the various conflicts about who she was and who she appeared to be.
Thank you, Margot.
You're welcome.
I'm Toby Hiller. Is this good? Is this good? Okay. The book that Edgework is publishing is called Charlie's Exit, and it's a book about a woman named Charlie who leaves her hometown and her marriage under suspicious circumstances. Her house burns down, and people kind of wonder if she did it, or her husband did it. It's really a book about forms of truth and people coming to understand, this woman coming to understand who she is and who the people in her life really are and how she wants to live her life. It also has a part of the book that's in the form of a diary of her great-grandmother, who was a pioneer woman who crossed the prairies. That's what that book is about. I'm a poet. I have 3 books of poetry published elsewhere. And I'm also a therapist. I've recently written a book with my husband about couples therapy, and I have other novels that I've written and one I'm working on. You're a swell dog, James.
Cool.
I've also written a book before, the first one of Edgework. It's a novel, my second formal novel. Although I think the memoirs I've written are right on the edge of novel and memoir. We'll get a chance to talk about that at some point. It's about 2 girls who are friends in their childhood, one of whom appears to the other to be an abused child, maybe even a sex slave, caught in an organization that is exploiting and abusing her. She disappears at a certain point, and the heroine of the book spends her life looking for her again. She meets someone 2 times at different points in her life. It's never clear that this is the same woman she knew as a child. This quest pushes her outside of language to a place where language cracks. And you're left to decide for yourself whether she's gone crazy or gone into a realm that in fact is beyond language. Very odd thing to write about. The psychologists among us think she's gone mad. The poets, which we also are, think she's penetrated into another world. It's called The Girl Who Went and Saw and Came Back.
I already talked about my books, but I'll just say that I'm probably the only one or one of the few here who's not a psychologist.
The book that I'm working on, I think, really shows the importance of what Edgework is doing. This is a book that's now called Are My Hands Clean? Feminist Writings in Resistance and Struggle. This was a book that the editors worked on for 5 years. It was supposed to be published in 1996 by Kitchen Table Women of Color Press. And for financial reasons, they were not able to publish the book. And it's an amazing collection of almost 50 women writers from different parts of the globe. The editors are Sharon Day, Mad Segrist, Lisa Albridge, and Jackie Alexander. And I'm delighted to have been a small part of getting this book together, but it's now Are My Hands Clean, which is taken from the Sweet Honey in the Rock song. And instead of being feminist writings against racism, it's really expanded, and it even now has a section of women writing that have written since September 11th. So I just think it's an extraordinary collection of the not only political action, but the fiction, poetry, the way that women have combined their lives and community and work in the struggles that we have daily, nationally, and internationally.
Having waited for something like 5 years for the right publisher to come along, I happened to end up with 2 books ready for publication. The one that's very close to my heart is a magical tale for children of all ages called The Grasshopper's Secret, which I illustrated, wrote in the garden, basically, watching little grasshoppers walk on the edge of my computer, and kind of walking through my own childhood in part through this story that is about 2 children, a boy and a girl, and a magical grasshopper. And then the other book, quite far away from this planet, is Love's Learning Place, Truth as Aphrodisiac in Women's Long-Term Relationships. So here comes the counselor in me, and the title in a way says it all, of course, because we are supposed to know everything about sex in our culture, and lo and behold, in fact, we know nothing, because nobody ever teaches us, nobody tells us honestly, and in our relationships, it is very hard, as everybody here knows probably, to talk about sex. And to tell the truth about it is even harder. So I try to go at it in a funny, playful, light-hearted way, and say, yes, there is a lot we can learn, and there is a place for this learning where truth is the cheapest, most effective, and greatest aphrodisiac on the market.
After reading the proofs of Renate's book, it made me want to get a relationship.
I just want to say one thing. Dorothy says she did a small part in bringing Our Hands Clean to light. But the truth of the matter is, the manuscript had been disappeared. Even the editors didn't know where it was. Nobody really remembered it anymore. Dorothy had a sense when she started working with Edgework that there was this extraordinary thing there that was perfect for Edgework. And she went and found it. She found the manuscript itself. She's been working with them ever since to develop it. Without her knowing about it, this manuscript would have been disappeared forever. So that's, I think you get some sense of what this collective endeavor is like, or what our participants are. So let's go to Salon.